p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
It's just gone 3 o'clock. Hello and welcome to the Briefing PM. Over the next hour, we'll be focusing on the fact that there could well be a very large Tory rebellion over vaccine mandates, a lot of disgruntlement on the Conservative backbenches, and also about that alleged rule-breaking at the Downing Street party. How do you feel at home? It's clear that lots of Conservative MPs are angry. Lots of people seem to be too keen to hear your views. Could it have an impact on whether British people follow the new coronavirus regulations as England moves to Plan B? We'll be in Scotland. It's budget day there. We'll have the latest on what's happening at Holyrood. And we'll be looking at Germany and its new Chancellor. What does it mean for German, UK and EU relations? That and so much more over the next hour. But first, at 3, is the latest news.
I'm Olivia Guthrie. This is your news at 3 o'clock. The Cabinet Secretary will now investigate 3 alleged parties in Downing Street and Whitehall during lockdown last year. During urgent questions in the House of Commons, Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis said they're looking into several claims. It comes after a leaked video showing Number 10 staff laughing about an alleged Downing Street party forced the resignation of government aide Allegra Stratton. Here's what the Paymaster General had to say in the Commons earlier.
Now, I can confirm to the House that the Cabinet Secretary's investigation will establish the facts surrounding the following. Allegations made of a gathering at Number 10 Downing Street on the 27th of November 2020, a gathering at the Department for Education on the 10th of December 2020, and allegations made of a gathering at Number 10 Downing Street on the 18th of December 2020.
Meanwhile, Boris Johnson is facing a revolt from Tory backbenchers who are questioning the government's credibility in enforcing England's Plan B COVID rules. New restrictions include extending mandatory masks to indoor public venues such as cinemas and theatres, whilst guidance to work from home where possible will return on Monday. Mr Johnson has denied bringing forward announcements to divert attention from the row. Conservative MP Andrew Rossendale has told GB News he'll vote against the measures.
I understand why, when the pandemic hit to begin with, none of us knew what we were facing, and the government was right to take action. Since then, I think that it has been a huge overreaction and we're not calculating the effects of lockdowns. So why, at this very point, when we're looking forward to Christmas, when businesses are really at their peak in terms of what they need to do for Christmas, to then restrict things? I don't really understand why we're doing it.
Dominic Raab and Grant Shapps are self-isolating after being in contact with the Australian Deputy Prime Minister, who has since tested positive for coronavirus. Barnaby Joyce confirmed the news while travelling in Washington, D.C. The ministers had both met Mr Joyce when he was in London earlier in the week. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross is also self-isolating after a member of his staff tested positive. Boris Johnson is facing renewed questions into a donation used to pay for the redecoration of his Downing Street flat. It comes after the Conservative Party was fined almost £18,000 by the Electoral Commission. It says the Tories failed to accurately report a donation and keep a proper accounting record. A party spokesperson said they're considering an appeal. The Scottish budget will be unveiled at Holyrood later, with the Finance Secretary saying it will provide stability and support. Kate Forbes will outline her draft tax and spending plans for next year and 2023 to MSPs in the first budget to be put forward jointly by the SNP and Scottish Greens. But the Scottish Conservatives say spending must support hard-pressed businesses by providing firms in the leisure, hospitality, retail and newspaper sectors with a 75% rates rebate. The UK is experiencing its largest ever outbreak of bird flu. Around 500,000 birds have been culled so far, with 40 infected premises across the UK. But the risk to human health remains very low, according to public health advice, and there's a low food safety risk. The chimney at Scotland's last remaining coal-fired power station has been demolished. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon pushed the button to ignite 700 kilos of explosives to bring down the chimney, which has stood at Longannet in Fife for over 50 years. Scotland has been coal-free since Scottish Power closed the station in 2016, and the energy company now generates 100% green electricity through its wind and solar farms. And Boris Johnson and his wife Carrie have announced the birth of a baby girl at a London hospital earlier today. It's the couple's second child after the birth of their son Wilfred in April 2020. A spokeswoman for the couple said both mother and daughter are doing very well. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. Now back to the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
Very good afternoon. Welcome to the Briefing PM. This is your fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Darren McCaffrey, and coming up over the next hour, Plan B being activated in England, with the Prime Minister even considering potentially mandatory vaccines. We'll be speaking to one parliamentarian who is opposing those new measures and looking at the disgruntlement on the Conservative benches. Also today, cigarettes are to be banned permanently in New Zealand for people under a certain age. Could the UK and others follow suit? And Angela Merkel has left power after 16 years in charge in Germany. We're speaking to a top journalist who's been following her career throughout, what it means for the rest of Europe, the world, and for us here in the UK. It has been a fascinating 24 hours in British politics. What do you think about what's happened? Do you think we're all being terribly harsh on the Prime Minister Boris Johnson? Or are you angry and upset about the alleged parties that may well have taken place in Downing Street? Do get in touch. We want to hear a broad range of views. You can email me at gbnews@gbnews.uk, tweet me at gbnews. Very good afternoon and welcome to the programme. Well, so new COVID restrictions and more revelations about revelations, I should say, about the apparent breaking rule parties in Downing Street. The question is, should the public follow the rules if those at the top are unable to do? It's clear that the Conservative Party and some MPs are pretty disgruntled about what they've heard over the last 24 hours. The major questions also about the government's advice about how consistent it is. Is it sensible to be ordered to work from home, but at the same time attend work Christmas parties? More than 30 Conservative MPs have hinted that they may well rebel, with many voicing opposition to vaccine passes, which are due to be introduced into England next week, and about whether the Prime Minister has been terribly open and honest over the past week about what precisely may have gone on in Downing Street in November and December last year. According to 3 Snap polls a majority of Brits now think the Prime Minister should resign, apparently. Many suggesting that yesterday was one of the lowest points since he became Prime Minister, 2.5 years ago. So, how do we feel? How does Parliament feel about this? How does essentially the right feel about Boris Johnson now as a Prime Minister? Well, delighted to say that I'm joined by Baroness Claire Fox, who is in the studio. Claire, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, your general assessment of the last 24 hours. Boris Johnson's been Prime Minister for 2.5 years. He's been through an awful lot, getting Brexit done, lots of allegations. How difficult has this been? Are we overblowing potentially how difficult this last day has been for the Prime Minister?
I don't think we're overblowing it, but I also think that it's not just been the last 24 hours. I think that what's changed is that a range of incidents have emerged that we sort of think, God, is that what the cost of lockdown was? I mean, we only have to remember at the start of the week we were talking about the tragic case of the 6-year-old boy Arthur, and the revelations that family had gone to the police and were told that they'd be arrested for breaking COVID regulations if they intervened in this family situation. We've heard about the Foreign Office, Civil Service, who were working from home, and that certainly contributed to what was happening in terms of the debacle of the Afghanistan withdrawal. So the reason I'm mentioning that is because I don't think that people have necessarily fetishised the party, but you start to think, just hold on, through only seeing everything through the prism of COVID, an awful lot was lost. Then we hear about the party and all of the gut-wrenching sacrifices that people went through last Christmas suddenly feel, well, were they necessary? Were those rules necessary? And on the back of that, we get Plan B. Out of nowhere, you can't blame people for being cynical. And it's developing a kind of nihilism that is not going to be healthy for any of us if people really just start to not believe anything politicians say.
Well, in saying that, but the weird thing is, looking at the opinion polls and frankly looking at compliance, and I've been on public transport quite a lot over the last week, that's not necessarily where it seems the vast majority of public opinion is. Actually, if anything, public opinion even today seems more cautious than where the government is.
Well, it is true that the polls say a certain thing, and I'm not saying I've got my finger on the pulse of everything by any stretch, but certainly people I've talked to, they're complying but reluctantly. Now, there's a real difference. Last Christmas, people were frightened, and they hadn't actually been out of lockdown. If you remember, we'd actually been so isolated from each other, we were still kind of feeling our way, and even though people put up with it, they did it as much out of fear. There's a lot less fear now. People will, of course, not want to be fined £200 on the tube, right? It's not quite the same. And a lot of people I know now who were very pro-lockdown in the past, very pro the regulations, are now cynical about them. That doesn't mean that... most ordinary people are good people, right? They don't go around breaking rules just for the sake of it. They're not, they're not, by that sense, political activists who are going to go, I'm not wearing my mask. They put it on, but that's not the same as believing in it. It's not the same as believing that these rules are necessary, and it's not the same as thinking in a kind of very, very fearful way we've got to keep away from each other. Some people are still,
of course, but wouldn't this argument be more potent, your argument be more potent in many regards, if that wasn't the case everywhere else? I mean, Germany's imposed restrictions. France is closing nightclubs tomorrow. Yeah. Even Sweden is imposing restrictions this winter. And my point is that Britain is not an outlier in all of this. In fact, in some ways, some could argue it's a couple of weeks behind where we've been.
I'm not suggesting for 2 minutes that there is... I'm actually not arguing they brought in Plan B to distract from. I didn't say that. No. I'm saying when you then want to bring in new restrictions, having let people have a certain degree of normality on the back of having it being revealed that obviously people who work at Number 10 weren't so scared of coronavirus even last Christmas that they weren't getting together without masks and socially distancing. I mean, if this is a virus that we should all be frightened of, you don't all go out and have a good time, right? So if the people closest to the action weren't doing that, then people are going to ask questions. In terms of whether it's an outlier or not in the international trends, if you're then going to introduce to this country Plan B, then you need to lay out very clearly your evidence and to put the scientific case and all the rest of it. And I don't think people were convinced that happened. It happened very quickly yesterday in Parliament. People were taken completely by surprise by it. And you'll know that things that had been ruled out were suddenly in. the vaccine passports, which make no sense in relation to this new variant, don't work. One of the things that we do know from European countries is they've had vaccine passports and we've still got the new variant and it's still being transmitted, and that actually vaccines do not stop transmission in substantial fashion.
Which may lead others to say that actually we need further restrictions. But before we get onto that, because we can talk about the science and the evidence, and let's go to our reporter Paul Hawkins, who is in Downing Street for us this lunchtime. Paul, if you can, just talk us through what we heard from Chris Whitty yesterday, Patrick Vallance, about why they think that these restrictions are necessary. I see the number of cases of Omicron are again up today, suggestions that this virus in the UK is potentially doubling every 2 to 3 days. But just talk us through what we heard in terms of what the scientists were suggesting yesterday.
Right, so in terms of what the scientists are suggesting, Darren, effectively overall COVID infections, right, are rising, are rising very slightly in the UK. They were steady for a while, they're now starting to rise slowly. Hospitalisations are actually falling slightly, okay? Now, within those COVID infection numbers, Omicron is doubling at roughly every 2 to 3 days, it is doubling, and it is on course to become the dominant variant COVID infection within the UK. Now, the scientists are saying, and the government is taking their advice, that in 2 to 3 days at the current rate of infection, because there are 1 million infections by the end of the month, and that could, we must stress, could translate into increased hospitalisation rate, and therefore the NHS would be overwhelmed in 2 to 3 weeks' time. Now, we don't know yet exactly how much more serious this Omicron variant is when it comes to dealing with people who have had the COVID jabs. I mean, we heard from the boss of Pfizer, I think it was yesterday or the day before, who said that if you have 3 jabs, then the Pfizer vaccine can deal with this Omicron variant as well as 2 jabs do with the Delta variant. But we simply don't know whether, that hasn't been independently verified. We don't know whether that's the same for all the other vaccines. So the jury's still out on whether the vaccines can deal with this new Omicron variant. Equally, we're not sure whether this Omicron variant is going to produce significantly worse cases of the disease, in which case it would put more people in hospital. We simply don't know. So the government effectively is following the scientists' advice. They're being extra cautious and they're trying to get ahead of the curve with less measures now to avoid a lockdown later. At least that is the government's justification for going to Plan B measures in England earlier.
The politics of all of this is also equally fascinating. We know many Conservative MPs were pretty angry yesterday in Parliament, some of them jeering their own health secretary. I think one called for him to resign around these extra restrictions, particularly on this idea of the vaccine passports, which are due to be introduced in England next week.
Yeah, they are controversial, because if it does turn out that the vaccines that we have at the moment with the boosters can deal with this new Omicron variant, then why do you need, these COVID passes? That's without taking into account the affront to liberties that some Conservative MPs have been citing as one of the reasons why they're unhappy with these new Plan B measures. William Ragg, he was the Conservative MP yesterday who was calling on the Health Secretary to resign as he was giving that statement in the Commons. And then, of course, you had Marcus Fish today calling the Plan B measures draconian, calling them an utter disgrace. Steve Baker, Conservative MP, calling on his fellow Conservative MPs not to back the government when they put this to the Commons next Tuesday. So the government having to rely on Labour to get these measures to get this legislation through the Commons to enact these measures. But there is significant concern that the evidence simply isn't there yet to say that we need these kind of COVID pass, these kind of measures, certainly the NHS COVID pass, to deal with this new Omicron variant. And then, of course, there's concerns as well from Conservative MPs about the effects that it will have on the hospitality industry. I mean, we heard from the Nighttime Trade Industry Association today, who've said that it will have a devastating impact. They cite Scotland and Wales, which already have NHS COVID passes, saying trade down there is down when it comes to nightclubs, between 26 and 30%. And they actually cite a government report in June which said that it could discourage people from going to nightclubs. Bringing in NHS COVID passes and bringing them in would be out of proportion to public health benefits, and certainly a significant number of Conservative MPs unhappy with the NHS COVID pass on those grounds. That's before we even get to the politics of the allegations surrounding the party at number 10.
Yeah, indeed. It's an awful lot on the Prime Minister's plate at the moment. Paul, as always, Paul Hawkins there down in Downing Street. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, let's speak to Christopher Snowdon. He's the head of lifestyle economics at the IEA. Christopher, good afternoon to you. It's fascinating, isn't it, the debate about vaccine passports? Because in the end, those that are big proponents of it would argue it's not actually that intrusive into public health. We all, I think everyone, wants to see the spread of this virus stopped or slowed down. You don't need to prove that you've been vaccinated. You just need to prove that either you've been vaccinated or that you've done a lateral flow test and you're not positive. Seems terribly sensible in some ways from a scientific point of view.
No, I don't agree at all. It's not sensible from a scientific point of view, from a public health point of view. I mean, they've clearly not worked. Not only have they not stopped infections, they don't seem to even slowed infections even slightly. You look at the recent curves in places like France and Germany. If you look prior to that, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, none of these countries that have vaccine passports have shown any benefit whatsoever, nor is any reason to think they would do, because we know that people who've been vaccinated can spread the virus. We've had several quite interesting and remarkable, really, super spreader events in places like Norway, Malaga, Denmark. Every single one of these super spreader events involve people who were doubly vaccinated and in many cases have had to do a lateral flow test beforehand. So we have real proof, almost perfect real-world experiments here showing that vaccine passports don't do a lick of it.
But Christopher, I suppose I'm asking a slightly different question, though. I mean, the evidence is out there, that's for scientists to argue about. I'm not a scientist, I can't prove one way or another whether vaccine passports work or not. That is up for others, I would argue, to decide. I mean, more on a philosophical point, how is it that intrusive to suggest that before someone goes to a large event, that you either prove you're double vaccinated or that you've done a test to at least give an indication that you haven't got the virus? How is that just not sensible?
That is not a good way to look at public policy, to say we don't care if this does any good or not. It's just not that intrusive. Not that intrusive compared to
even in the middle of a pandemic?
Well,
public health at risk?
Well, as I've just said, they don't do any good. And I think, actually, you don't have to be a scientist to be able to see that. The bar needs to be set very, very high, where we're essentially asking people to take medical tests or to prove their medical records before they go into a public building to do something that's perfectly normal. We've been so battered down by government regulations over the last 2 years, and particularly the lockdowns, that now we're seeing incredibly intrusive policies like this as being almost mild. You're suggesting they're kind of relatively moderate. They're not relatively moderate compared to anything that happened before March 2020, and we should reclaim our liberty and get things back to an even keel in which the government needs to prove that there is an overwhelming threat of a serious crisis and emergency before we give away any of our liberties. And we're not doing that, and the government has produced really no evidence that this particular variant takes us back to anything like the situation we were like in March 2020. I think they're doing it to distract people's attention from the little scandal involving the Christmas party last year. SAGE don't seem to have any real idea about the Omicron variant. They seem to know less than an armchair epidemiologist about it.
So you're suggesting you suggesting we should do nothing about this new variant, that we should just carry on as we are?
Yeah, because what's being proposed won't make any difference anyway. So why would you just impose extra costs on people? You know, I mean, the evidence coming out from South Africa in particular, and doctors have been saying this for 2 weeks, and everyone just keeps ignoring them. The evidence that the WHO now has today finally acknowledged is that this is a more mild variant. We also know from the Pfizer study that was mentioned just before I came on that the vaccines work. We're going to need boosters, but we've boosted more than nearly anybody else in the world. We're in a fantastic position to deal with this. If we're not, then there's not a lot we can do about it.
I don't want to cause any offence here, but the whole point is, though, that frankly, yeah, you're right, there is preliminary evidence to suggest it's milder. There is also evidence from Pfizer who said that the vaccine works after 3 boosts to the vaccine. But there is also evidence that this is hell of a lot more transmissible. And that's what's concerning epidemiologists. And the whole point is, actually, the vast swathe of epidemiologists in this country disagree with what you've got to say, and they probably know more about this than you know.
I've no idea. I don't think anyone's done a straw poll, but we're talking here. I agree. I mean, clearly,
But the government's top scientists disagree with your position, and shouldn't we trust them when it comes to the science and the epidemiology of this over what you're suggesting? No?
Yeah, well, there are all sorts of views. I think that when it comes to public policy, anybody should be entitled to say their piece. SAGE have been wrong and wrong and wrong again, particularly this year. If you remember all their predictions about what was going to happen if we reopened in July, and I suppose if we'd been talking then, you would have said I should know my place and stick to my knitting. I mean, we all have a stake in this. This isn't in any case about science. As I said, I think this is an entirely political issue. That Boris has got himself into a bit of a scrape and he wants to get some different headlines. If it's not that, am I wrong about that? Then he's just jumping as soon as anybody fires any kind of warning shot. And that is a terrible position to be in as well, because it means that every time there is a variant, and I'm sure you'll agree that all the scientists say that this is going to keep mutating, we'll keep getting new variants, we're going to start bringing in vaccine passports and masks and goodness knows what else every time there's a new variant? I don't think we can do this. I think we need to accept that, as Boris said back in February, the roadmap to freedom is irreversible.
OK, Christopher, appreciate your thoughts and your views. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. That's Christopher Snowdon there, who is from the IEA. Claire Fox is still sat next to me. I think she's been pretty frustrated with my questions. We are going to get her views, I promise, on all of this in just a couple of minutes. But we do have to break for a break, I'm afraid, at this moment in time. Coming up, we'll also be in Scotland, where they're having their budget day. What are the details of that? And also in Germany, the end of an era as Angela Merkel steps down. What does the new Chancellor mean for us here in the UK? That and much more, just a couple of minutes. But first, here's the weather on this Thursday afternoon.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. Many of us having a fairly wet end to the day, but tomorrow a bright and breezy kind of day, but there will be showers, particularly in the west. And a pretty cold feel as well with that breeze picking up. At the moment we've got low pressure to the northwest, but this weather front is slicing its way across the country, bringing outbreaks of rain and particularly some heavy bursts across the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast in the next few hours. It does all tend to scoot out into the North Sea through the early hours, so things becoming drier in the east. But further west there will be showers, those showers of snow over the Scottish mountains, but at low levels hail is likely and the showers could be pretty lively. As the wet weather clears away and skies stay clear across Scotland for longest, there could be a touch of frost here, which might mean it's a little icy first thing on Friday morning. During Friday, though, much of the east dry and bright with sunny spells, and the same goes for southern England. A few showers in the southwest, certainly lots of showers for northwest England, Wales, Northern Ireland and western Scotland. Heavy showers, rain at low levels, yes, some snow over the Scottish hills, but as I said, hail and thunder likely in those showers as well. They'll zip through on the breeze, and that breeze will make it feel chilly. Temperatures close to average, but feeling colder because of that wind. The wind and the showers all tend to fade a little through Friday evening, so many places again becoming dry and clear, and it will turn frosty, certainly across Scotland, parts of northern England as we head into the weekend. Further west, though, the cloud is gathering, and we'll see more rain pushing back into Northern Ireland initially, then into western Scotland during Saturday morning, and also rain then creeping into western parts of England and Wales before Saturday lunchtime. The easternmost parts of England stay largely dry through Saturday, but it will cloud over and it will feel cold here after that frosty start. Slowly but surely, as the rain arrives elsewhere, it'll start to turn milder. A milder day for all on Sunday, but a predominantly cloudy day with some rain and the winds picking up once more, particularly so on Sunday night.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
I'm Darren McCaffrey, and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK politics, we've got it covered. That's The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey, Monday to Thursday, 3 p.m. on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. Pretty lively programme just after 3:30. We're going to go to Scotland now, though, because it's budget day and the Finance Secretary, there she is, Katie Forbes, is setting out the new budget for 2020. £35 billion worth of spending over the next year, with the SNP government are arguing is not enough in terms of what they would want, because they're asking the UK government now, with these restrictions, potentially to step in and supply some more money. The Scottish Conservatives, though, they're highlighting it's about 8% more than ministers typically had when it came to pre-COVID spending. Well, while that is going on in the chamber, let's go live to Holyrood, where that budget announcement has started, and speak to the Shadow Economy Secretary for the Scottish Conservatives, Maurice Golden. Very good afternoon to you. Just set out these objections when it comes to spending. £35 billion, an awful lot of money. Where are the priorities, or where do you think the priorities should be when it comes to spending in Scotland?
I think we have to protect our NHS. There's massive differentials coming through from the UK government, over £2 billion to protect Scotland's NHS. That's one major priority. Beyond that, we need to support business, and that's why we're calling for a 75% reduction in rates relief over the next financial year. We also need to ensure that the Greens don't influence the SNP government to roll back on our road building programme as well. So there's much in there, as well as ensuring that we tackle a climate emergency, which the SNP and now aided by the Greens have continually failed to meet. the climate change targets in which they set.
In saying that, the SNP government in Scotland are saying that actually, given the fact we've got new restrictions now in place, in England only, but it looks like there is even the possibility of further restrictions that are not being ruled out, that it is up to the UK government to go further and to help businesses out, particularly in the run-up to Christmas, when lots of businesses, frankly, make the most amount of money of the year.
I mean, I think Rishi Sunak and the UK government have done an amazing job in supporting businesses and communities, not just here in Scotland, but throughout the rest of the United Kingdom. They protected almost 1 million people's jobs here in Scotland through the furlough scheme, in addition to loans for businesses throughout the height of the pandemic. But we need to ensure that any further restrictions, as announced today in England, are commensurate and proportionate to dealing with this new variant. And I've got full confidence that if further restrictions beyond that which we have at the moment are required, then Rishi Sunak and the UK government will once again step up to the plate and support businesses and communities here in Scotland.
It's really fascinating, this, isn't it? You voted against vaccine passports in Scotland.
Yes.
You did. And yet your Prime Minister, the country's leader, the UK Prime Minister, is saying he's bringing them into place in England next week. You can't be very happy about that.
Well, it's a matter for England, but my views on the vaccine passports are quite clear. And we've actually got more evidence now that they don't work in practice from being rolled out here in Scotland. They don't prove that someone doesn't have COVID, that isn't carrying the variant. And in many cases, the enforcement of the vaccine passport isn't being upheld. And moreover, one of the main reasons in Scotland that we were told that we should have a vaccine passport is that it would encourage vaccinations. And we haven't seen that occur either as a result of the vaccine passport. So obviously it's a matter for the UK government on vaccine passports, but my view and the evidence that I've seen here in Scotland are that they shouldn't be introduced, that they don't make a manifest difference to the spread of COVID. And beyond that, from a personal point of view, I think requiring people to show private health information to access public venues is something that I am very wary of.
Just finally, Maurice, your leader, Douglas Ross, was on the media yesterday, frankly suggesting that this party in Downing Street last December did happen. There's multiple sources suggesting it did, but also suggesting that if Boris Johnson has misled Parliament, frankly has lied, he needs to go. Do you agree?
Well, first of all, I'd like to send my well wishes, and I'm sure your viewers do, to Boris and Carrie, who've just brought a new baby girl into the world today, and I wish them all the best on a personal basis. But in regard to your specific point, if Boris Johnson or anyone else has misled Parliament, then there is no choice but to resign. We were consistent in saying that when our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, appeared to have done exactly the same thing. But I think what we have to do before we get to that point is let the investigation occur. Let's find out the reasons. Let's find out what Boris knew and when. And if anyone in Downing Street attending those parties, if indeed they did, and if indeed there were more than one, then they should face disciplinary sanctions as well, because it's completely unacceptable that when people were sacrificing, seeing their loved ones during Christmas last year, that people were choosing to indulge in going to parties. But let's find out the results from the investigation before we jump to any conclusions.
OK, Maurice, appreciate your views. Thank you very much indeed. Maurice Golden there, who is the Conservative Scottish spokesperson for the economy, speaking about the budget in Scotland, but also seemingly splits, particularly when it comes to vaccine passports here in the UK, between where the Scottish Conservative Party are and the Conservative Party in England, or at least the leadership of the Conservative Party in England at Westminster. OK, we're going to pause there. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll be looking back at Angela Merkel's reign in Germany. What does the new Chancellor mean for us here in the UK? Plus, an absolutely fascinating story about New Zealand essentially saying that if you're a certain age, you will not be able to buy cigarettes there. Is that a really good idea? A liberty infringing idea? We want your views. We're going to be speaking to Claire Fox about that in just a couple of minutes. But first, here's the news.
Good afternoon, I'm Olivia Guthrie. Here are the latest headlines. The Cabinet Secretary will now investigate 3 alleged parties in Downing Street and Whitehall during lockdown last year. Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis says they're looking into several claims. He also says the Cabinet Office will liaise with police if anything illegal is uncovered. The investigation follows a leaked video showing Number 10 staff laughing about breaking restrictions just days after one of the alleged events. Boris Johnson's facing a revolt from Tory backbenchers who are questioning the government's credibility in enforcing England's Plan B COVID rules. New restrictions include extending mandatory masks to indoor public venues, such as cinemas and theatres, and guidance to work from home where possible will return on Monday. Well, Boris Johnson's also facing renewed questions into a donation used to pay for the redecoration of his Downing Street flat. The Conservative Party has been fined almost £18,000 by the Electoral Commission. It says the Tories failed to accurately report a donation and keep a proper accounting record. A party spokesperson said they were considering an appeal. And it's been announced that the Prime Minister will spend some time with his family after his wife, Kari, gave birth to a baby girl earlier today. It's the couple's second child after the birth of their son, Wilfred, in April 2020. A spokeswoman for the couple has said both mother and daughter are doing very well. We'll have a full update for you at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Very good afternoon. Welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. The time 20 minutes to 4 o'clock. Conservative MPs this afternoon. Diana Davison, of course, appears on GB News. I have long opposed vaccine passports and so will vote against their introduction next week. Ben Bradley saying, I cannot vote for restrictions just in case at a time when hospitalisations and deaths are falling. Peter Bone, of course, saying that he may well lose, this is Boris Johnson, his job if the wider vaccine passport scheme was to be introduced, particularly this idea that if mandatory vaccinations were to be brought into the UK. Claire Fox, Baroness Claire Fox, is still with us in the studio. You've been sitting there very patiently for the last 20 minutes. There is anger within the Conservative Party, but the government clearly do think that this is the right measure to take forwards. You know, there's been this discussion about listening to the science, hasn't there? They would argue that's what they're doing. They're listening to the science.
They're not listening to the science because, as you've heard from both Chris Snowdon and also as the evidence has shown, the vaccine passports don't necessarily work. But can we have some of the science in here, which is the evidence is out now about how many people are now being diagnosed with cancer, terminal, inoperable, incalculable damage has been done by what has happened in relation to restrictions. You can't just say that everything should be seen through COVID eyes. That's one of the points I'm making. But you had an interesting exchange with Chris Snowdon because you were saying, you know, but on principle, is there anything wrong when you go to a nightclub? And I suppose my attitude to this is, yes, because we live in a free society, and when you go out into the public realm, if somebody stops you and says, excuse me, are you on the pill? You can't come in here if you're not, or you are. Have you had a hysterectomy? Can I see your status on this, that, and the other?
But if you're going to drive a car, you need a driving licence.
Yes.
Because the whole point is
private medical. Private medical
data.
But
it's not though. Just having been able to say that you haven't got that you've done a lateral flow test. Is that private medical?
Just hold on. The whole thing is that we are free to live in a society. And the government has to make a very, very good case to restrict our freedoms. And what I'm suggesting is that very, very good case has not happened. We've already heard, and this is the problem, that when you actually have a vaccine, it's brilliant at protecting you, but it doesn't stop transmission. We then have we don't know whether this now increased cases of the new...
There are studies to suggest it does dampen down transmissibility.
A tiny bit, but it's also the case that we've also got this new variant, and we've heard very clearly that new variant, as yet, is not proven to be serious, right? So what we then do is we say, as other guests have said to you, well, we're going to, just in case, remove your liberty. And I'm suggesting to you that this is a very dangerous path to go down. And that if you only see everything through the narrow view of, well, we've got to take every possible risk away from any possible choice. And I'm suggesting there are other dangers here, right? And that's why I said to you, working from home did lead to damaging consequences. These things that you are kind of quite, well, you know, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with answering these questions? You can say that we now need a licence to go to nightclubs. You've just said we need a licence to drive. We need a licence to go to a theatre.
In the midst of a pandemic, is it that outrageous that we're trying to protect public health by ensuring that people don't have a virus that could kill others?
I'm suggesting to you that actually, until yesterday, we were actually being given, I mean, not that it's there to give, but we were actually returning slightly to normal, right? And then suddenly out of nowhere, and when I say suddenly out of nowhere, the variant has emerged, something to look at, perfectly important that those people who understand viruses work on that. I'm suggesting that the political measures that have been taken are disproportionate, have not been justified scientifically, and then you actually said to Chris Snowdon, but politically, never mind what the evidence is, because he's given you some evidence. You said, never mind that. But you said...
I always feel awkward arguing about the argument.
Principle, but you just said, on principle, though, what's wrong with it? And I'm saying to you, on principle, there's something very majorly wrong with it, really seriously wrong with it. So you, in order to get away with it, you've really got to justify it, and they haven't.
Just very finally on this, you picked up about cancer rates, but the counter-argument to what you're saying is actually the National Health Service there are people in hospital with coronavirus. That is undoubtedly true. No one can disagree with that. What the NHS can't afford to cope with is far more people in hospital with coronavirus. And if it does, that means then you start cancelling operations for cancer treatment and for other easily treatable diseases, and so that's the argument in the whole, is that actually by imposing some of these restrictions, it actually ensures that those other illnesses are treated.
We're all familiar with the argument, but one of the things is that, first of all, this variant hasn't led to increased hospitalisations. Hospitalisations are falling, and they've just introduced more restrictions. Secondly, I don't mind if they do a bit of planning with the NHS. You know, if they'd actually said, we're going to purpose whole loads of places to make sure that if anything happens again. What I'm suggesting to you is they have gone straight away for taking away our liberties. If the NHS is not fit for purpose, we've got a bigger problem, right? And we have got a big problem. And then we discover that all the doctors, when you can't get to see the GP, are all giving out booster vaccines. Why aren't they using the voluntary vaccinators that actually I know many who volunteered and were sent home because the NHS was stuffing them? So it's not as straightforward as you're suggesting. And those of us who are worried about this, and I'm, by the way, not a Conservative or on the right, and there are even people in Labour ranks and Lib Dems occasionally who worry about the civil liberties implications. I think this is not because we're glib about the virus. It's not because we haven't noticed there's a pandemic. It's because we actually can see society as a whole needs to be taken into consideration. And we are not doing that at the moment.
OK, Claire, we're going to pause there for a second because we're going to talk about New Zealand. Really fascinating stuff unspoken in just a couple of minutes. But first, we are going to go to Germany because it's been a big day, a big couple of days in Germany because Olaf Scholz has been sworn in as its new chancellor, formally taking power from Angela Merkel yesterday after an historic 16 years as leader. Well, let's get the very thoughts and details on all of this from Thomas Kielner. He is a historian, journalist, covered Angela Merkel's career quite extensively over the last decade or so. A very good afternoon to you, Thomas. It really is the end of an era to a large degree, isn't it? You know, whatever you think about Angela Merkel, she's been a titan of German and European politics for almost 2 decades.
Well, there is a strange dichotomy here when you talk about Angela Merkel and her reputation. Abroad, she she couldn't do wrong. She was the queen of Europe. And someone said the other day now that the EU has to have its summit meetings with Angela Merkel in future. It will be like an Agatha Christie story without Miss Marple in it. So she had huge follower and accolades abroad. At home, she was increasingly beginning to be seen as a picture that is leading her own party, the CDU, the Christian Democrats, into the lowest possible showing in poll rating. From one election after another, the CDU, which was one a catch-all party, went from 44% to 33% to this year no more than 24%. And that is a rather indicting conclusion about her own personal sort of triumph over the political landscape and her inability to create a continuously strong Christian democratic conservative government. She's failed on that, and so the new chancellor is from the opposite party, the Social Democrats. He's been a member of her coalition for the last 4 and more years, so there'll be some element of continuity, but we must resuscitate Germany as a force to be reckoned with and to get off the fence and take some more strongly recognizable positions rather than her sort of harmonious appearance where she tried to conciliate all and sundry. But in the new world of ours, we have to be strong vis-à-vis Russia. We have to be outspoken vis-à-vis China. And we are hoping that Mr. Scholz will lead a more hands-on government in those regards.
But frankly, Thomas, is Olaf Scholz going to do that? As you say, he's been Vice-Chancellor for most of the past 5 years or so. He's also
Finance Minister,
which constrains him as well, doesn't it?
Well, it does constrain him, but of course there are sort of clouds of crisis on the horizon in Ukraine, where Russia is taking a rather aggressive sort of stance, and the American president has already told the Germans, if push comes to shove and Russia behaves aggressively, and we have to think of sanctions, would you please, Germans, close down your new gas pipeline that you're about to function and to open next year, the Nord Stream 2. I mean, that would be a rather stiffening of the Western attitude. And Scholz and his new foreign secretary, who is a member of the Green Party, interestingly enough, just came away from Paris yesterday to say, yes, indeed, the Russians have to abide by international standards, and she is likely, and Scholz is, to follow the American leadership and close down this pipeline, which will create an enormous crisis in Europe. So the Russians have been warned, like Angela Merkel never warned them. She spoke Russian fluently. She was almost a good friend with Putin. She knew his sort of totalitarian sort of instincts, but she never really spoke out clearly that in an end, a stop has to be made to Russia's encroachment on the freedom of Ukraine.
Just very finally, Thomas, and if you can be very quick, please. What does this mean for the UK? Are we going to see any change of direction in terms of German-UK relations with Olaf Scholz?
Unfortunately, not at all. No, I don't think so. If there is to be a change, it has to come from London. The EU is going to become more Franco-German sort of centered, and they are going to create a new drive forward for improvement of EU affairs and modernization and so forth. So Britain is the odd one out. Although we are going to have a foreign secretary meeting in Liverpool only this week. But Britain has to show that she is continuing to abide by the protocol about Northern Ireland and by the exit strategy and continue to have friendly relations. But she is not counting for very much in the future makeup of the EU.
Okay. Thomas, really appreciate your thoughts this afternoon. Fascinating stuff. A big change there in Germany. Thomas Killinger joining us there. Now, I promised you this discussion, didn't I, about what's happened in New Zealand. Essentially, if you were born after 2008 there, you're not going to be able to buy cigarettes in the future because they're going to change the law, Claire Fox. I think I can say that you're a smoker, can I?
I think you can say that.
The doctors are saying this is world-leading, not only going to reduce access to tobacco, but also I think they're going to restrict nicotine levels in cigarettes. Good for people's health, bad for their liberty?
Of course it's bad for their liberty. And we were talking earlier about what are the impacts maybe of the restrictions in terms of COVID, and you kept saying in the pandemic. One of the things I'm very concerned about is that public health have kind of got carried away with themselves. You know, there's been people who've been arguing
that life is about living rather than just...
Yeah, well, also, life is free. You know, we are free citizens, right? And in New Zealand, where we know some of the restrictions on COVID have been dramatic, they kind of say, oh, well, if we can say that in the good of your health, we're going to take your freedom away on COVID, well, why not now move again on tobacco? By the way, one of the fascinating things on this is they've said the group that we're particularly worried about are the Maori community, right? And
where smoking rates are higher.
Smoking rates are higher. There's always this kind of paternalism of we're doing it to look after you. Actually, this is taking away. I mean, being a Maori in New Zealand is no fun. A lot of them are very poor. The one thing you decide to do is take away the one bit of pleasure you've got. Now, it didn't dawn on them that what you might do is increase their standard of living. You attack them on the basis that they need to be looked after by the state. And as for young people being denied tobacco, you know what's going to happen? Think about it.
They'll find
Black market.
They'll find someone else.
This is the prohibition come again. It's terrible, illiberal.
Okay, Claire, really appreciate it. Baroness Claire Fox joining us throughout the programme. Really appreciate it. That is it from me for today. I'm back again tomorrow at 9. Up next, it's Alex. But first, the weather. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. Many of us having a fairly wet end to the day, but tomorrow a bright and breezy kind of day, but there will be showers, particularly in the west, and a pretty cold feel as well with that breeze picking up. At the moment we've got low pressure to the northwest, but this weather front is slicing its way across the country, bringing outbreaks of rain and particularly some heavy bursts across the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast in the next few hours. It does all tend to scoot out into the North Sea through the early hours, so things becoming drier in the east. But further west there will be showers, those showers of snow over the Scottish mountains, but at low levels hail is likely and the showers could be pretty lively. As the wet weather